Hi, so we have Andrea Learned here today talking to us from Seattle. I'm super excited to have you.
It's great to be here.
All right, and so we're going to talk about some really interesting stuff, but the first thing we need to do is sort of introduce you, and you have a sort of a multifaceted background. You're, amongst other things, the founder of Bikes for Climate. But rather than me try and explain what you do, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and explain to us maybe what you do and how you got here?
Yep. Okay, great. I started my career as kind of a communications strategist, and then I'll just kind of hit the bigger pieces of what I've done. I got into marketing to women and became an expert in that, and then wrote a book on that called Don't Think Pink. The next big chunk of my world was I got into looking at green consumerism and then who are the leaders in sustainable business. And then from there, I got into climate action. So those are the big nuggets. I will say the thread through all of that is that I looked at women first and women as consumers and how they made decisions. That led me to looking at sustainability leadership and what are the traits that make a good leader. They tend to be things that women tend to more naturally be doing. And then looking at climate action, I got into the space in 2015 during the Paris Agreement year. And that's when I was really using Twitter as a tool and watching and monitoring the conversation, and noticed that even in cities for climate and those sorts of conversations, bikes as this incredible tool and this community builder and all of that just wasn't coming up and getting enough emphasis. So that's when I found it, and it's my own personal little campaign. It's just hashtag #bikes4climate. And I just started tagging stuff and naming and faming any cities or leaders who were really doing this well. So that's how I've from then built a lot of climate action influence, and then been really known for the Bikes for Climate thing. So that's a short version.
Great. And tell me, we'll get into the bike stuff because that's obviously an overlap in terms of what Trove does. But tell me and tell us a little bit more about what it means sort of to be an influencer. What is the grander vision, if you like?
Well, it's interesting because then the rest of my work is that I'm helping other organizations figure out how to build their leadership platforms. So to become an influencer is to recognize and own that you have a voice, and that you could curate and you could serve the community really by delivering stuff. I will say, curating good links and helping people learn more about your particular area, as opposed to a lot of leadership platform development is, look at me, I'm the CEO of a company. Look at me, I just, like it's just all broadcast messaging, if you put it that way. So I'm about building this influence through social capital and community engagement that has a lot to do with loving up the sector and being really loud about celebrating it and helping show the progress.
So I like the way you put it, and maybe some of our watchers and listeners might be thinking, "Oh, how is that relevant to what Trove does? You guys are in the insurance space, they do." Wow, okay. The reason, and I'll answer the question as I've posed it. All of our customers are businesses, naturally enough, but what they are all consistently doing is bring some new form of mobility to the market space. And by nature of doing something new, there needs to be conversation, right? There's a trend that they're surfing or they're wanting to amplify as well. So them just talking about themselves and us Trove just talking about ourselves doesn't help us enormously. Now, what's really cool though also about working in one of these businesses and in our business is there's some intersection between a couple of different trends. Certainly we're a for-profit organization. We want to make money, but we get to be involved in cool things that are doing things more than just making money. And so in our preparation sessions, we had some conversations around bicycles. And I was sharing a little bit about my story of my two kids, how we live in the hills, which isn't really a great place for biking, or so we thought. Along comes COVID. We kick the kids out the door and suddenly they're mountain biking. And it's been phenomenal. It's such a great thing. Now, you're in exactly the right spot to sort of comment on this. Is my experience, our experience, a one-off thing, or is there truly something changing around bikes in this season of of COVID essentially.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I think the thing that you speak to with your kids and what I've seen even in like neighbors who were formerly just, they drove their SUV everywhere, is it's like everything stopped. They looked around, they realized they didn't have necessarily any place to drive. And then they started to notice bikes. And so the behavior changes, potentially, you always had a bike in your garage, it was gathering dust. I also think that adults, right, are like, oh yeah, I biked a little bit when I was a kid. And you just completely lost track of, one, how fun it is. Again, that it can be both kind of a fitness or a recreational thing, but also it's transportation. If you want your child to like go visit the neighbor, you don't want to have to worry about, necessarily getting in the car for a 1 mile trip. It's just sort of thinking about bikes for all their joy and public health and climate action and transportation. So bikes are an ultimate solution for so many of these problems, really heightened by COVID, when we weren't going anymore and people started to see their cars sitting out, parked on the street, doing nothing. That just helped with the shift.
So you use this lovely term of naming and faming. So it's great that as individuals we're on our bikes and we're moving around, we're getting some exercise. But the broader picture is there's municipalities, there's this sort of infrastructure in the broadest sense of the world that needs to encourage that. And it also, it can't just be about cycling down to the neighbor. Like there's, in order for it to be sustainable, I think people like me probably need to be on bicycles more. So what are you seeing going on in terms of municipalities or sort of more, I suppose, sort of foundational infrastructure changing?
Well, I am definitely very closely watching sort of city mayors or decision makers in cities that are actually being seen riding their bike and how that potentially is influencing their decision making or the policies that are happening. Excuse me. And what's happening is because of the climate action, because of the climate emergency, we just got out of Climate Week, New York City last week. And again, from my perspective, there wasn't enough discussion about bikes and transportation. The thing is that we have to be looking at this sort of multimodally, this like get out on your bike, then maybe an EV and all of that. And I think that the point of this is resilience. So if you look at COVID, essential workers, all of a sudden they didn't have a way to get to work in big cities because buses and subways weren't ideal. And so then we were like, oh my gosh, these e-bikes are incredible for that. I would say also when there are fires or there are hurricanes, which we're only going to see more of, what's going to get you past the road that's flooded out? Like, you can sort of weave, you're a lot more nimble if you're using a bike. So to think about modes of transportation as a flow of something, yes, and not, if you're for bikes, you're against cars. You can't, it's all sort of a series of choices, transportation choices and modes. And I think that we've not been given enough attention to e-bikes and bikes in that mix. And I think that's really where cities, and I will say from my perspective, a lot more cities that are led by women. So women mayors is what I've noticed. And that comes from my deeper background. Observing the community and watching who's on the uptake with bikes and e-cargo bikes and e-bikes anyway, a lot of women and moms for transportation and just for hauling kids and all of that. So that's where I'm seeing this headed. It's a resilience and it's just a different frame that we've sort of been shaken into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. In my hometown of Oakland, we saw them shut the streets down. And it sort of created literally and figuratively created some space for the conversation, but also for a realization that we're, at least from my humble opinion, we're over indexed on four-wheeled vehicles. And actually we kind of just need to rebalance, and it created a space for that. So that's been really, I think, really exciting and fun. So again, back to our core goal as a business is actually to help other businesses grow their businesses in a responsible way. But so you're again kind of on the forefront of that. What sort of advice do you have for our type of customers who are commercial operations, are bringing fleets of vehicles, and it's everything from e-scooters all the way up to self-driving cars. So it's the range of different things, but what should they be thinking about give a sort of bearing in mind the shift sort of in the bicycle, the focus on the bicycle?
Well, I think one of the things that's sort of huge that helps with sharing of vehicles and all that is to really amplify this word that not every, and this is a US thing, I think mainly, not everyone needs a second car.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go end the second car, that's a campaign that all of your clients, anybody in this space could potentially really get behind rather. And the other thing is with regard to car share, little things like making sure that all the car share have a bike rack on them so that it is like, we want you to take your bike and get out and ride it. Things like that. And I also think with regard to climate, more and more people are understanding that this is a climate emergency. What if more of the mobility apps really looked at, these are your choices to get from here to here. Why don't we rank them in climate in emissions if you care, right? And so you help people make more decisions. So it isn't, all of those are aligned. It's a yes and, not a but only I can do this. It's really this yes and. It's part of my loving out my name and fame and yes and. It's like no doors are closed. Let's be in this together and elevate fewer second cars in the US, and really thinking about bikes first. If it's a 1 mile or a 2 mile trip, maybe it's just a bike. And then how does the whole system of your clientele work into that phasing?
Mm-hmm. Great. So we've been wrapping up these conversations with a sort of a look into the future, putting people on the spot a little bit in terms of predictions. So we've been talking a lot about what's kind of happening now, which is great. Cast your mind forward a little bit if you're comfortable, and give us a little bit of a prediction. Good stuff's happening now in terms of bikes. What's going to happen, and you can pick the time frame, the geography, but what are you optimistic about the future? What kind of predictions do you have for us?
I have to be optimistic for the future, for one. The other thing is, I will say, just on a one-to-one basis, anybody who gets on a bike after a long time of not having been on one is blown away, right, by the simplicity of it. The other thing is that as I'm looking at the big cities that are changing this, and how this is going, I'm looking at, obviously, from the US perspective, there's a lot of EU cities that are doing a much better job,
Mm-hmm.
a lot, Barcelona or, just cities in other places besides the US. So what I'm looking at in the US is women mayors
Mm-hmm.
and college town cities being the most able and nimble to respond to that, and also have the most kind of pressure from younger people, right, or grad students, or the research that's going on, like, this is the way this is going. And so I just feel like we should be looking at college towns. I think we should have enough with San Francisco and New York City and just look at what the college towns are doing and start to model, scale, figure out how to go from there.
Great. Well, Andrea, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it was really fun. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you.